for proper representation. Marginalized groups can create the narrative, and we can tell our stories vividly and accurately. Our voices and our experiences, they're legitimized after we've been told for so long that our existence is either tolerated or invalidated. Everyone represents something. You can represent your family name, your heritage, your alma mater, your favorite teams, groups that you're a part of, even the towns and cities that you're from. And everyone deserves a chance to represent. Equitable representation is not only important, but it's also pretty awesome. So check this out. What I want you all to do, crowd participation, what I want you all to do is think about your favorite meal. It can be breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert. It could be Thanksgiving, since that's right around the corner. And I want you to think about the quality of the ingredients that goes into it. Think about the sizzles in the pans, the rumbling of the water in the pots, those sounds. And then how those sounds transform into this aroma. An aroma where we can tell how potent some spices are, how muted some herbs are, and this harmonious balance that happens. The balance that we taste. The layers, the textures, the flavors, the depth, the love. That bowl or that plate that you just thought about is everything. The presentation is stellar, the experience is unmatched, and it's simply amazing. And the exact same thing happens in other art forms. When you have all of these flavors present, when the herbs and the spices, they dance with other ingredients and infuse them with new life, a masterpiece is made, something that everybody can deeply and fully appreciate. So the question remains, did I ever make those video games that I talked about all the way in the beginning? Well, not yet, but I have gone down many different routes on my journey as an artist. I've created some pretty cool graphics and animations that have been on TV. I've worked with some amazing, amazing businesses and entrepreneurs. And I'm here on this TEDx stage, all because one artist showed up at the right time and gave me hope. And I'm sure there are other artists and art students that are in the same situation I was in during my senior year of college. But with more diversity and more equity, more and more doors are open. So what better time than now? Than right now, to burst through those doors and make room for all of that amazing talent, to tell their stories, to create some stellar artwork, and to represent. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for allowing us to start. And I should acknowledge that my colleague, Don Hyman, is here with me. Don is a project manager on my team and is also a creative, I should mention, but is here to support. And so I should mention also that I am in the midst of managing a situation. And if at some point that interferes with my ability to complete the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn, and you'll be in her very capable hands for the remainder of the presentation. But for now, wanted to just share with you, acknowledge that that video, we thought did an excellent job of talking about why equity is important to the arts. And because the arts are not my area of expertise, why not use somebody that has a really compelling and interesting frame and a lived experience that was really relevant to just open up the topic. But now we'll shift into our broader focus on equity in Fairfax County and sort of how we entered into this work. So this is a map of the county, and this map comes from a report called the Getting Ahead, the Uneven Opportunity Landscape in Northern Virginia. It was developed through support of the Northern Virginia Health Foundation by the Center on Society and Health at VCU. And it basically illustrates that depending on where you are in Fairfax County, that there are varying levels of opportunity and vulnerability. It calls these yellow areas, the report calls these yellow areas, quote unquote, islands of disadvantage. And in those islands of disadvantage, they say that people living in those areas are likely to fare worse across a number of indicators of life success. And that the opportunities available to people in those areas to overcome those vulnerabilities are also limited. Now, this is one report. The same general themes have been seen in other reports done by PolicyLink and the Urban Institute. And we have a list of resources at the end of our presentation that give links to these so you can look at them in more detail. But it's not unique. This report is not unique. It's been, these findings have been noted over many years through many different reports. It's also not unique to Fairfax County. You know, it's seen across the Northern Virginia area, it's seen across the metropolitan Washington region, and frankly, is seen in areas across the country. And it's this issue of inequity in a community that is place-based, right? It's predictable. And when we look at these places, these so-called islands of disadvantage, we see higher concentrations of people of color living in those areas. And we also see higher concentrations of lower income people living in these areas. And so our strategy, our thought is that we don't want there to be varying levels of opportunity in Fairfax County. We want to work strategically to better understand that and to address that. And these reports really steer us that as we tackle these issues, that we should be place-based, system-focused, and really concentrate on addressing those spatial inequities that limit opportunity to individuals and families living in these neighborhoods. Next slide. And so that understanding led to the adoption of our One Fairfax policy and resolution. The resolution was adopted by our Board of Supervisors and School Board in July of 2016, and it was later followed by the One Fairfax policy, which was also adopted by the Board of Supervisors and School Board in November of 2017. What the policy basically does is it directs the county and schools to consider equity in all of our planning and decision-making and the delivery of our programs and services. It sets out a very high-level process about the things that we should do as we consider equity. It involves community and stakeholder engagement, making sure that we as an institution are trained and have the capacity to consider equity, that we utilize available data, that we work together, not work in isolation, and that we hold ourselves accountable for making progress, recognizing that if we're going to advance equity in Fairfax County, it's not the role of a particular organization, but it's really about how we work together and really work in partnership with the community. Fundamentally, it's about asking ourselves a couple of questions, and that's about who benefits and who is burdened by the actions that we take as the county, either that we take currently or that we've taken in the past that have led to conditions where people have experienced burden or had greater access to benefits. And so from a burden perspective, our goal is to mitigate those burdens. And then from a benefit perspective, our goal is to ensure that benefits are more broadly shared. It's not an initiative, it's not a program. One Fairfax is really about how we govern and manage to advance equity. It requires that we think about our history, because much of the outcomes that we see today are really driven by policies and practices that happened in past generations. It requires us to think strategically about where we are now and what we'd like to see, where we'd like to be in the future, and to set clear priorities and strategies that'll help us to get there. That means that we have to be prepared to make some choices, particularly in an environment where we have a limited set of resources. It means that we're going to have to commit to doing things differently through bold and innovative approaches. We can't keep doing the same thing, because if we keep doing the same thing, we'll get the same results. And like I said, it's really central to our work that we do it with the full engagement of the community, and particularly those folks who are impacted disproportionately or negatively by government policy and practice, and also with the key stakeholders in the community who we believe can be instrumental in helping us to create the structure of opportunities that will allow all Fairfax County residents to be able to live to their fullest potential. We follow a framework around advancing equity that we have adopted from an organization called the Local Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And it's fairly simple. It's called Normalized, Organized, Operationalized toward a vision. And so Normalized is just normalize our focus on equity, make sure that it's understood why we're focusing on equity and what those inequities look like. And those inequities in Fairfax County are predictable by race primarily, but by other social categories, including gender and income and ability level. And so, you know, we center race because we think that, or we see that across most life indicators, it's really by race that you can predict how well people are going to fare. But we acknowledge that individuals have intersecting identities, and that we really see that depending on the other types of identities people have, they may be subjected to other, you know, further marginalization. We also organize. So we're coming together as an organization, within our organization, within departments, forming teams, coming together in ways that will support our ability to understand and respond to the inequities that we're seeing. And we're implementing strategies, which is the operationalizing piece. That operationalizing piece is also the evaluation and accountability piece, because it's not just throwing random strategies at a problem, but really seeking to understand what lies at the root of why we're seeing what we're seeing, so that our strategies can target things at the root level and hopefully lead to more sustainable success. And then finally, we're doing it towards a vision, and our vision is to become One Fairfax. So what is equity? What we know is that whether it's infant mortality or life expectancy, race predicts how well you will do. And we see this across, you know, most areas of life success: education, jobs, and arts and culture. And we can talk more specifically about arts in a bit. In seeking to achieve racial equity, what we're doing is we want to ensure that it's no longer predictable to assign advantage or disadvantage by group identity. We should not be able to predict that on any given scale of life success, that people of color are going to fare worse than white people. Our focus is also on implementing strategies that will improve outcomes and close those racial gaps where we see them. So the concept of race, I want to just acknowledge, can be one that's difficult to fully understand and uncomfortable in some cases to talk about. And for that reason, I offer this example, this video, which is actually a documentary series produced several years ago, which really outlines race as a concept and helps to really, people to understand that race is not biological in its basis. It's actually a social construct whereby people were grouped by color of skin in ways to make it easier to associate benefits and advantages and gains, or to subject to marginalization. And I think, for anybody engaging in the work of equity, it is central to understand the concept of race. And I would do a disservice to it to begin to open up that box in this brief time. But I would strongly suggest that you take a look at this documentary series. I've included the link here. It's available on Vimeo for a nominal fee, but it's well worth the time. It's 3 episodes, about an hour for each episode. We particularly emphasize watching episode 3 because that gets to the structural nature of it, but the other episodes cover history and the biological or lack of a biological basis for race, and I think really serve to undo a lot of what we've learned over our education and our experiences, which might make us believe that there are inherent deficiencies or differences in people. And we have to understand that as a society, there was really intention in creating this, this structure, and that has now resulted in outcomes that we see, inequitable outcomes that we see today. So in terms of some concepts in just terminology as you begin this journey, I wanted to first talk about the difference between the terms diversity, inclusion, and equity. And the video, I think, did a really good job of talking about diversity and equity, meaning that diversity is about those differences in people and perspective and how we celebrate and support that, but that ultimately what we're focusing on is how we can change results. How are we building upon that diversity? And that's where I think inclusion comes in, because inclusion is not just who's at the table, but how we're able to assign power and hear voice and see how people of different experiences and backgrounds are able to influence what's happening in their lives and in the sort of broader context of our organizations and society. And then that level of inclusion is what then results in change in people's life conditions and situations, and that's what equity is. There's also some difference in the idea of equity versus equality. This graphic is one I'm sure that many of you have seen before. I won't go into a whole lot of detail here, but I will say that, it's an illustration that makes, suggests that the fundamental difference in those two concepts is that equality is sameness. It's assigning resources and supports based on, giving everybody the same thing, whereas equity takes into consideration the differences in people's situations. As illustrated here, those differences are really differences in the people. One of the kids is short, one of the kids is tall. If you assign the same thing to each one of the kids, it's not going to lead to achieving the goal. But if you consider how they're situated and assign those resources based on their circumstances, you then are able to ensure that each of them have an opportunity to achieve the goal. And in this case, the goal is watching the ball game. Next slide. But we have really shifted from that, because the challenge in that graphic is sort of twofold. At one level, it suggests that you have to take away from one kid to give something to the other kid, and it promotes a notion of scarcity. And One Fairfax, in our focus on equity, is fundamentally not about taking away to give to another. It is about thinking about how we can distribute our resources more thoughtfully and in a more informed way. But it's not necessarily about taking from one group to give to another. Each group that gets what that group needs in order to succeed. The other challenge that we see with the previous illustration is that it focuses on the inherent differences being within the people. And we want to discourage that, because what we want to emphasize, particularly with our focus in One Fairfax on policy and practice, is that the difference is not in the people. The difference is in the structure of opportunity available to them. And so in this graphic, which is similar to the previous one, all the people are about the same size. What's different is the ground on which they stand. It's not level. It's the fence in front of them. It's sloped. And so those are meant to represent the different conditions in our society, and recognize that people, regardless of their individual differences, are often situated within different circumstances. And it's those circumstances that we seek to change. We also want to emphasize that everybody requires some level of support to succeed. It may not look the same, but those, to suggest that there are people that don't require some level of intervention or support in order to achieve their goals is not really a realistic picture of the role. And again, we're coming at it from a government perspective of the role of government in the lives of people. Next slide. And so again, I mentioned that, this is centered on an understanding of race and racism. And as I mentioned, we're focusing really at the institutional and structural levels, because that's where we believe in government that we can have influence through policy, practice, and procedures. I don't want to suggest that addressing racism at the individual level is not important. It is. Individual level racism impacts people in negative ways. It exists in our community, and we want to eliminate it. But what we believe we can have an opportunity to do at a greater scale through government is to focus on how racism is reflected through our institutions. How are our policies, practices, and procedures working better for white people than they are for people of color, even when that was not what our intention was. In many cases, we're talking about policies and practices that have been institutionalized for years that some of us may have never had any ability, any real active role in developing, but they are resulting in inequities, and it's incumbent upon us to understand those and address them. We also look at it from a structural perspective, in that institutions come together, and those institutions create structures, and those structures then limit people's opportunities potentially. So if you think of schools and transportation and the access to healthy food, all of those things are sort of different types of institutions. But if they are limited amongst the population, or if they are limited in a particular community, that begins to limit the structure of opportunity that's available to that population. And so again, all very important concepts, and all that I think are worthy of much deeper thought and discussion. We offer them to you today as sort of a foundation to help you as you begin your journey, and to really understand why it's important to focus on and center race. Next slide. Just to quickly say, like I said, we're doing this as the role of government, but it is so essential that as we embark and continue on our journey to advance equity, that we are on that road with others in the community. And so just want to acknowledge the importance of the work that you all are taking on, because as the community begins to focus on this concept of equity, it really can inform the work that we do. It helps us to understand how the doors of opportunity are opened or closed to different populations. It helps us to understand what's driving and what's at the root of the inequities that we see. It helps us to understand and build.
Yeah, but now I called in, so it's kind of getting the audio at least. That's fine.
To see a group of shared values and assumptions that make equity an important, something that's important in our community as a whole, and not just to those who are directly impacted by inequity. And finally, in co-creating solutions, right? Because the government, while we play a significant role, does not hold the key to advancing equity. Those solutions are things that we need to arrive at working with community. Next slide. The concept of targeted universalism is another one that we wanted to share with you, because we think it's important, because often equity work ends up as an afterthought. And we want to suggest that all of you in the work that you do desire to be successful, and likely have identified goals that would reflect that success. We think of those as universal goals. But when you think about different populations, and when you think about different places and how those populations and places are situated in terms of achieving that goal, you get a better understanding of where structural inequity comes in. That, again, depending on who you are and where you are, you may have different levels of opportunity to achieve the desired goal. What we want to encourage people to understand is that it's okay to set universal goals, but it's important to think about how the various people that in places that you work with are situated, and to identify targeted solutions that will help those uniquely oriented people in places to have the opportunity structures available to them to achieve the goal. And so, again, there's a lot more that can be said about this concept, but the idea is to think of equity goals as a part of the success of your organization. What it's encouraging us to do is to figure out who is not faring as well in relation to those goals, and to look to apply targeted strategies so that all people have the opportunity to achieve success. Next slide. And just quickly, there are lots of opportunities that all of us need to be successful: access to education and employment, healthy food, digital access, which is really important these days, housing, and again, the focus of why you all are here, arts and culture. Those are all really important elements of a strong community. And those are all things that are instrumental in terms of achieving and advancing equity. So with that very brief opportunity to hear some concepts, we wanted to just quickly pause before moving forward to see how the group feels about their journey, or their readiness for the journey to advance equity. So if you could answer the question, how prepared do you feel to begin applying an equity focus to your work? Very prepared, prepared, somewhat prepared, or not prepared at all? I think we've kind of reached the number of people that are going to vote. I think we can end the poll.
Yeah, let's see. I don't think we didn't have anybody share any responses with that, but if you'd like to, you can also include your answer in the chat. That way we can kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point is that I feel it's good that people feel prepared to begin this journey. And I'm glad to hear that, because all of us can begin this journey just by how we begin to think about our just simple parts of our work. Next slide. So, one way to think about it is just about what are the questions that we're asking ourselves about equity as it relates to our work. So the goal is not about blame, assigning blame and figuring out who in our group or who in our community is racist. It's really to understand, are there racial inequities and what's causing them? We also can not think about sort of intention, but we can think more about impacts, like what has happened, what's the result of those racial inequities, and what actions are currently being taken that are producing the racial inequities. We're not thinking about sort of individual level prejudice in the beliefs of people. Again, that's important to a certain degree, but what we really want to emphasize are the systems that are responsible, not the individuals. And through those systems, think about what are the proactive strategies and solutions that can be applied so that we are acknowledging that inequities exist in our community and are not just focusing on things that have already happened. We are really concentrating on knowing our communities and anticipating where inequities can occur so that our solutions are really more proactive. Next slide. And this is just a very simple list of questions that we have adapted from GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, that I think can be applied in any situation to, again, begin and give you the ability to consider equity in your work. At the top is really understanding the outcomes that you want to achieve. And as I said before, having universal goals, but recognizing how different groups or areas are impacted as it relates to those goals. And when you start there, it allows you to utilize data in ways to give you more information and inform your work. Hopefully it will encourage you to engage with the community to understand more about how people are experiencing your work and where there might be opportunities to hear more and work more with the community. As I mentioned before, that benefit and burden question is one I think that's instrumental and fairly simple to apply, but understand how what you're doing is either contributing to advancing equity or how it might be in some way fostering inequity and how you might be able to mitigate that. And then the other questions are really about, once you know what you want to do to address the inequities that you see or to promote equity, what are some of the factors that you need to consider to ensure that what the actions that you choose to take are sustainable? And finally, we just offer these sort of a few examples of where there might be some barriers in your organization that might, limit your ability to focus on equity. These are here, and we'll share this presentation with you so that you can take a closer look at these. The main point is that you're often not really faced with sort of somebody in the front of the room stopping you from doing the work that needs to be done as it relates to equity. Usually what you find are sort of typical, organizational hangups that about, being expedient, thinking about being too busy, not, sort of assigning power to groups in the organization. Those sorts of things are the types of things that stand in the way of advancing equity. So I would encourage you, as you continue your work, to think about how some of these factors might be present in your own organization and realize that their presence is often a barrier to advancing equity. And here, finally, just some, some resources that we found, again, specifically related to equity in the arts, because what we offer to you today is really some general concepts, but when you start to think about it specifically within the context of the arts, there might be some good examples here that you all can consider specific to the different types of work that you do. And with that, I believe we're at the end of our time, but have some additional time set aside for questions if folks have them. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Karla. So yes, as Karla said, we're now going to move into the Q&A part of our presentation. If you can stay on and you would like to ask questions, please place them in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand feature and I will call on you to unmute yourself. So I guess I'll start with, we did get a question prior to the start of the workshop that we can kind of start with. And that is, what are practical steps an arts organization can take to engage and include the diverse population of its community?
So, there might be things that specific arts groups have done, but I would say, generally speaking, is to work with trusted entities in the community. In many communities, there are already people, organizations who are connected to communities, and sometimes what I've seen in my experience is that everybody shows up seeking to build trust at an individual level versus establishing relationships and alliances where trust can be transferred. And so one of the things that I found is particularly helpful is not necessarily to, just jump straight into the community, but to get a sense about the various networks and stakeholders that are associated with that community, and to utilize their relationships to build connections with people in a particular community. The other thing, which is much easier said than done, is to ensure and work toward making your organization reflect what the community looks like and is interested in. And that does not mean necessarily, having to change your whole staff and change all of your programming, but it does mean thinking about, having some knowledge about what the community is interested in and what is important to them, and be able to demonstrate how the work that you represent is connected to the things that have meaning in the community. Because sometimes, again, as I think we always start about in a very one-sided way, talking about ourselves and sharing about what we want people to understand versus attempting to seek understanding and then connecting our interests to their interests.
Very good. Oh, okay, we got another question. How would you recommend reaching out to members of the community if there is a language barrier?
Yeah, I think this is another way where it's important to work through networks. There's the technical answer to it, and it's sort of seeking people who speak certain languages to be a part of your efforts that have the ability technically to engage with people. But that can be in the form of translations and interpretation. And again, those resources are available in our community. But I think relationships, again, are important. And there are a number of organizations serving the multilingual community in Fairfax and working through organizations that have that language capability, but also that cultural connection to different communities is another way.
Very good. And then Karla, thanks for such a thoughtful presentation. I especially like your thinking around the importance of institutional and structural issues around equity. stakeholder engagement / community engagement is key. Do you have any examples that the county or organization have used to bring in community voice?
And I see that that question comes from Andrea, who I have worked with for a number of years, or worked with a long time ago, I'll say. And I would say that one of the things that we found that has been particularly helpful was the neighborhood initiative structure. And the county, if you think about those yellow areas on that map that I showed you in the county, those are areas where the county for a number of years has invested in nonprofits to work with us to establish relationships with organizations and residents in those neighborhoods. And through that structure, we have, learned a lot about those neighborhoods, and it has informed how we structure our policy and practice to serve those neighborhoods. But the number of years it has taken to, build that structure, but more importantly, to build that trust is important, which is why I think you don't just show up into a community. You look at where the connections already are and try to become a part of established networks, because again, it's difficult, and and to do it well, it requires a lot of time to forge that level of understanding and relationship. So we've utilized that that neighborhood initiative structure, not just as a way of delivering information to communities, but also to receive information. And so a part of the role of the nonprofits that we work with in these neighborhoods is to build community leadership. And it's not just the nonprofit speaking on behalf of residents, but it's residents articulating themselves, again, how the doors of opportunity are opened or closed to them, and how we might take action to address that.
Great. Next question, what actions have been taken to adequately resource all arts organizations in Fairfax County with respect to building programs for staff and patrons that address diversity, inclusion, and equity?
Well, I would actually sort of defer to my ArtsFairfax friends to speak more specifically about that. I will say that ArtsFairfax, beyond my presentation to you all today, we are working more with ArtsFairfax as a partner to better understand how resources can be more equitably distributed, and how ArtsFairfax can be a partner with us in making those, gaining that information and hopefully aligning some of the work that the county is doing to support, arts organizations in the county. So I would say it's a work in progress, and Lisa and Linda, if there are others who can speak to it more specifically, but I think some of the strategic planning efforts that you all have been involved in are going to be very helpful in informing how the county is able to do just this.
I'll just jump in really quickly and say a few words about what we're doing from the grants perspective. We're working with our grants committee to set up pathways. I see that one of our grants committee members, Dr. Nyati Dokai, is here with us today, of short-term, midterm, and long-term steps that we're going to be implementing in order to improve our grants program and make it more equitable.
We're looking at resources and strategic directions across the board for the organization. it's a major endeavor for us. And we're also reaching out and talking with, a lot of colleagues, seeing what other people are doing. And so I hope we're going to be building, resources for everyone, make those resources more accessible. I do know, we envy some of our other local arts agencies in the region who we know Maryland is better funded than Virginia in general. They get a lot of state money, and they actually received about $5 million of CARES money. And one of the things they did with that money, other than passing it along to the arts organizations, is enable every arts organization to get a consultant to do some DEAI work. And, which is a wonderful goal and a wonderful thing to think about. I don't think we, are there yet in the resources to do that, but we certainly can, advocate for and work towards that. So, as Karla said, it's a process, and we are sort of working at it, and hope to share as much as we can with everyone as we go along.
Great. And it looks like we have another question. We're looking at creating focus groups to help us listen to and engage various communities, both as current and future singing members and as audiences. Are you aware of best practices or facilitators/organizations that can guide arts organizations in this process?
So not specifically for arts organizations, but there are, some folks that I'm familiar with in the community who are sort of, I'll say, experts at community engagement and engagement of, I would say, hard to connect to communities. One of those we worked with recently in the county is called Cities RX. So Cities, capital RX, like prescription. And I think if you Google them, you might be able to, it's a small shop, but they've helped us. You might be able to find them if you Google them. But I would say they're a small shop, but they've helped us in terms of recent work that we've done with the chairman of the Board of Supervisors. And then also they were helpful on some housing work. But again, they may not have arts expertise, but they have the community expertise that I think can be helpful. So that's just one organization. Dawn might know of others. But like I said, for different communities that you're interested in engaging with, we maintain a list of community organizations that, depending on who, the area of the county that you're interested in focusing on, or the, the population that you're interested in engaging with, that we might be able to put you in contact with folks that can help.
Great. And with that, I think that is our final question. And if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping things up. Thank you again to Karla for this wonderful presentation, and to Dawn. As we are wrapping up, please type one word describing the session in the chat. I'm going to open back up my presentation. And here we go. That's where we were before. Okay, this gives you a nice listing of everything that's coming up. So these are our upcoming workshops. All of the sessions are from noon to 1:30. So they were previously scheduled, and you may have seen it as from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. But as you saw today, we felt there was a need to extend to 1.5 hours to enable more time for discussion. We will be announcing the speakers for the remaining workshops shortly. The other thing that you will see is a link to an evaluation that I'll be sending in a follow-up email with everybody. We hope that you'll take a few minutes to complete it and appreciate your feedback. Thank you to Karla and Dawn again, and to everyone for participating in this first workshop of our series. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the Arts Forward Fund, National Endowment of the Arts, Reston Community Center, Virginia Commission for the Arts, and the Claude Moore Charitable Foundation. We appreciate everybody's honest and candid conversations today, and we look forward to seeing everyone again in the next workshop. And before I hop off, I just want to acknowledge some of the words we have in the chat here. So we have informative, interesting. Thank you. This was awesome. Lots of informative. That's great. Helpful, reflective, big picture, great depth of historical info and perspective, thought-provoking, critical, and so elegantly presented. Thank you, Karla and Dawn. And then a thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.